This video is brought to you by Carcajou Tactical and Grey Fox Strategic. For 10% off your next purchase with Grey Fox Strategic, use code DA10. All right, we are good to go.
Let's do it.
Welcome to another edition of the Extended Ask the Operator with Randy Turner, retired JTF2 operator, 16 years in the unit, 21 in the Canadian Armed Forces. 21?
Yes, sir. Yep.
Yeah, I read things. Okay, question number 1. What is something that is not spoken about enough to help prep for selection?
What is something that's not spoken about enough to prep for selection? I would say, in some cases, really tapping into why you're doing what you're doing, well before you even start to prepare for selection. Understand why you want to do this type of job, why you're going to put yourself through the ringer mentally, physically, and emotionally, and really tap into the why and the purpose behind why you're doing it. Sometimes it doesn't get really spoken about enough. Guys have an idea what they're getting into, and then on selection, day 3 turns into day 4, which turns into day 5, and the throttle, it gets pinned to the floor. And it'll be during those dark moments or those moments of question that the why will come to the surface. So I would say, really tap into understanding, do you have everything in place from the support structure? If you're married with kids, is that in place? Are they on board? Your financial situation, is that taken care of? That way, when you go into selection, it's not something that you're worried about. The fact that you're potentially going to move geographical locations. Have you put some thought into what that looks like? There's a lot that goes into it, and all of it is motivation to not only want to become amongst the Tier 1 organization in Canada, but also be able to put yourself through the rigors of selection, and then the course, which is the marathon afterwards. So really tap into the why, all facets of life.
Amazing. I don't know that you can answer this question, actually. Is JTF2 and CSOR being utilized in today's conflict? I don't know what conflict they could necessarily be referring to, but
yeah. I would say what I know and then what I can speak about is two different things. So what I know is there are multiple lines of operation going on with JTF2. What I know is CSOR has a contingent in Europe. Those things I know, and I can speak to it. What they're doing, I cannot speak to it. CSOR, JTF2, and CJIRU are all active. They're all active in different parts across the globe. What they're doing and the effects that they're having are good. Some of those things I can't speak about. One, I'm not at liberty to, and two, there's a reason that a lot of stuff doesn't make the front page of the National Post. So we'll just respect that, but know that, yeah, all 3 elements of CanSoftCom are busy doing stuff.
I'm going to butcher this, so I apologize in advance. Have you worked with SOET? It says, I'm a CHIMO, I'm assuming it's CHIMO.
Yeah, engineer.
Okay. And interested in applying, are they purely EOD?
Yeah. So this question is about the Special Operations Explosive Technician, so what's referred to as a SOET. SOET usually comes from an engineering background, so a combat engineer, and they get advanced courses on, everything from not just bomb disposal, explosive disposal, but builds, materials, capabilities and effects for, cutting through materials if we're using explosive to, blow a hole in the wall, or, cut something or destroy something. Those are specific explosive materials that would be utilized for different jobs, details, and tasks. So it's have a wealth of knowledge on all the intricacies of the materials, the builds, but also how to dismantle and remedy them safe. Should they encounter an improvised explosive device on an objective or in an operational context. So yeah, engineers, they can apply for these jobs. So if you're a combat engineer in the Canadian Armed Forces, you can apply for these positions as what's referred to as supporters and specialists. at JTF2. CSOR, I don't believe, I could be speaking out of turn, but I don't believe they have SOATs. They have an explosive capability. It's just not at the same level as JTF2. And similar to CGIRE as well, they have exposure to explosive capability. It's just not at the same level.
Okay. I feel confident in saying that you kind of touched on this in the past, but there's a question. Is the assaulter path for someone who's putting down roots, family, house, etc.?
So can you read that question again? Is
the assaulter path for someone who's putting down roots, family, house, etc.?
So the question about family, house, roots, where they are, uplifting and taking on a career as an assaulter, there are lots of guys that are successful assaulters, crushing it, getting after it, doing great work, and they have families, they have young kids, they have, a significant other that also may have a full-time job, so they manage it. I've answered this question in the past, but I'll answer it again. The tempo, the job, the detail, the expectation is, I would say, more suited for a single man with less external pressures. But the reality is that I would say 50%, if not more, are married with kids and they make it happen. So if you're considering a life in CANSOFCOM with one of the organizations, know that it's going to be life-changing in a positive way for you and your family.
How has your experience been working with OPP True Team? And I'm just going to quickly interject and speak on my own behalf. And they are some of my favorite people that we get to work with.
Yes.
But I'll let you, we have very different perspectives, but they are some of my favorite people to be around.
Yeah, mine too. What's my experience working with the OPP True Team? So the Tactics and Rescue Unit, they are awesome. I've had a great level of exposure working with the OPP, a little bit with their General Patrol, very little bit with their ERT, their Emergency Response Team. Primarily, it's been with the True Team. And I was so grateful and honored and, blessed to be on their payroll for almost 2 years. So basically as a tactical consultant, they had me on retainer for almost 2 years. And, they would call me up. I'd help provide some training or guidance or just consultation on stuff that they were doing, whether it was selection related or the course rollout related or specific tactics, pertaining to firearms, CQB, or defensive tactics. They're a great bunch of guys to work with. The exposure that I've had to that organization, they have a West Division, they have a Central Division and an East Division, all very, very similar, but also slightly different in their own regard. And what makes it different is the geographical dislocation. So when I don't say different in a negative light, in fact, the opposite. They do things a little bit different. Culturally, they're a little bit different, but very, very similar amongst all three of those regions. And my exposure to them has been nothing but positive. So nothing but good things to say. If you're an OPP officer and you're considering a life in the tactical community, put your boots on, tie them up tight, get to work, do what you need to do to prepare yourself. Because selection is, for them, it's not an easy road. It's a good challenge. And then their course is very demanding as well. So I would say, put yourself in the most optimal position to be a successful candidate and work towards it. You'd be happy you did so.
Those dudes get after it so hard.
Mm-hmm.
It's awesome. Thoughts on Canada having an 18 X-ray program? How would you structure it? Now, for the listeners and myself, what is an 18 X-ray?
That's a good question. I'd have to Google it.
Oh, shit. Okay, hold on.
18 X-ray program? I'm not sure.
Stand by.
Because we may just simply call it something different.
We will Google this in real time. Is an Army contract for individuals to enlist directly into Special Forces. Bypassing conventional Army. So you and I have talked about this off camera.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, what are your thoughts on a direct pipeline to CANSOFCOM?
So direct pipeline for folks to go from civilian world right into CANSOFCOM. I understand some nations call it 18 X-ray or X-ray 18. Is that what it is?
18 X-ray.
Yeah, 18 X-ray. So that's an unfamiliar term for me, but a direct entry is what we have had the conversation. And I believe maybe 7 or 8 years ago, CSOR was entertaining the idea, and they were doing a lot of good legwork to try to figure out what that would look like, how it would be implemented. And it was pretty close to being executed. And then something happened, which I'm not privy to. Why the decision was to put that on the shelf, I'm not sure. I see benefit to it, but there's also a lot of potential negative consequences as well. And the negative consequence could be mitigated by having the individual as a civilian one day signing something that, you know, basically agrees to the protocols that would be in place, where if they're successful, they go down this path. If they're unsuccessful, then they go down this path. I think the concern is from a liability perspective. If we take a civilian off the street who has potential and they wash out at some point, then what do we do with them? Like, the concern is it's a human being at the end of the day. They have there needs to be some mechanism in place to ensure that they have a soft landing so they can carry on being, you know, a productive citizen of Canada. What does that look like? It could be as simple as a piece of paper or a document that's signed that says, look, I'm going to do my best. If I wash out or I fail at any point, no problem. I tried, and I'll go back to doing whatever I was doing as a civilian. That's an option. I think the benefit would be, you would see a lot of people, not a lot of people maybe, but you would see a general core of quality people who know exactly where they want to go. They just want to speed up the process, and maybe they don't want to spend 3 or 4 years as a line tech as part of the signals trade, or they don't want to spend 3 or 4 years as a cook, or any trade that you can imagine, but they're very interested in employment with CanSoftCom. I think it would be a very unique social experiment, but the benefit to the end product at the end might be so marginal that maybe it's not worth it from the Canadian Forces perspective. I think it would be interesting to see. Will it ever come to fruition? I'm not sure.
I love this question. How much harder is JTF2 over CSOR?
How much harder is JTF2 over CSOR? It's a very vague question. Harder in what regard? And I feel like I've answered this question quite a bit, but I'll take another stab at it. JTF2, CSOR, CJIRU all pose different challenges in, you know, difficulty in different ways. And just to clarify, the units are different. Their mandates are different. Their skills, their what's the word I'm looking for? Their capabilities are different, and what they're expected to respond to upon the request of the government is different. That doesn't mean better. And I want to be very clear. I know I've said stuff in the past that was misunderstood, so I want to clarify it. There are studs in all 3 of those organizations. And I've literally heard people who have never stepped foot in any of those organizations saying they're all the same, or they're just as good as each other. What does that mean? Good, better, best? That's all very relative terms. They're very challenging, all 3. They have different mandates and expectations from skilled tradecraft capabilities, but also the response to the government's request in capability execution. That's what makes them different. You can imagine what benefit would there be to Canada and to the Canadian Armed Forces and to CanSoftCom if we had 3 organizations that are doing the exact same thing. There would be no benefit. So they all need to be different and need to understand what their mandates are, and then do their best at executing whatever is asked of the government. So what I would say, if, you know, to try to answer this question, which it is a vague question, harder, what organization is harder? They're all very different, very challenging. And I would say with confidence, if you wanted to do, or at least put yourself in the position to do as many things as possible as a Special Forces soldier, you would go to try out for JTF2, because you're going to have exposure to a lot more than what would be expected at CSOR and CJIRU. I want to be very clear. It doesn't make one better or worse. They're different. There are capabilities and there are skills that all 3 units will kind of cross over with. There's certain things that all 3 units will do. Some just do it a little bit more than others. and some do it in different environments. So operations declared versus undeclared, for an example. It is not foreign to wrap our heads around the fact that JTF2 would be expected to infiltrate foreign countries where there is no heads up or government signatures that suggest their involvement. And I don't want to speak out of turn or definitely say anything that I shouldn't, but there are differences with declared operations and undeclared operations. And I'll just leave it at that. They're all challenging in different ways. There's a reason that JTF2 is a tier 1 organization. There's a reason that CSOR is a tier 2 organization. And there's a reason that CGIRU is known as a very specialized organization. So they're all very good people in all those organizations. And I truly mean that to the core of my being. When I hear people say, CSOR is just as good as JTF2, it kind of makes my blood curdle a little bit. I'm like, in what regard? What do you mean? Are you talking about running a gun and how fast a speed reload is with a pistol? That doesn't matter. All that's teachable. There are certain attributes that are being sought after for JTF2 that are different than CGIRU and different than CSOR. That's just the nature and the reality of the business. There are individuals that find themselves employed with CGIRU or CSOR who want to be doing the things that JTF2 are doing, and they'll get a little bit of training, and that little bit of training, that little bit of exposure can sometimes allow that individual, that group of individuals from that unit to be dangerous. And what I mean dangerous is dangerous to themselves and the safety of the team, but also the operational outcome. So we have to be careful with that. You can want to do those things, and I admire that. I admire that you're motivated and you have a desire to continuously improve. Here's the caveat to that. There's absolutely nothing stopping you from trying out and becoming part of that organization. So if you chose to go to CGIRU, but you don't want to do another, or CSOR, excuse me, and you don't want to do another selection, that's on you. There's nothing stopping you from wanting to go to the next level. You can do that. But what happens sometimes is guys will do selection. And I've heard this, and I've had many conversations with guys that have a ton of potential. And they've said words like, well, I don't think I'm ready for JTF2 yet. They don't even know what they're really getting into, but they've already made up that narrative in their head that, well, if I do CSOR selection, it's going to be a little bit easier. I'll get my feet wet, and then, we'll see about, maybe doing it again. Or CGIRU, same thing. And then they get there and they get exposure. Now they're part of the community and they see certain things and they want that certain thing, whether it's a piece of kit or capability or an element of training. If you want that and it falls outside of your mandate of what the unit is to do and to be really good at, there's absolutely nothing wrong with wanting and executing on another selection. So go do a JTF2 selection. If you want to do stuff that JTF2 guys do, that's all I would say. It's mind-boggling when guys, interoperate together and they'll find themselves doing a very similar role, and in their heads, because I've heard it, they say, so here we are doing the exact same job, but for not the same price or not the same title. It's like, man, it's one element of a whole lot of things that are going on. You got to be careful with that. So if you're really motivated and you're really interested, and do selection, you're going to be grateful for it. You're going to be, proud of yourself for doing it. And if the technical side of collection as a collection operator interests you, then man, go to CSOR and CGIRU, and be proud of it. Or if you want to do more of the, expeditionary type force operations, not only training in foreign countries, but training our own members, which is something that I would say should fall into the wheelhouse of what CSOR does, then be proud of that. Be super proud of what you're doing and do it really, really well. And then at some point during your career, if you wanted to try out for JTF2 and then get exposure to even more, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So interoperably, it's it's great to see that all the organizations and units are crossing over a little bit, which is good. But just keep in mind, each unit has a very directive, substantiated mandate. Understand it, and if you don't understand it, ask those questions. And hopefully that will give you some guidance on where to be.
Can I ask a follow-up question?
Yes, please.
Do you think people, pilots, etc., in the 427 kind of have a similar rather outlook as like quote unquote conventional pilots, like in the reg forces?
Yeah. So, yeah, one organization that I don't speak about too much is 427 Squadron, and the aviation squadron in Petawawa. Their level of training and what they get exposed to from like a tactical flight procedures, like rotary wing or fixed wing, excuse me, it's predominantly rotary wing. You know, they, in comparison to the conventional forces, they would be, you know, exposed to and expected to be able to insert troops in all sorts of different gnarly terrains, right? So they would get an element of higher levels of training that a conventional force chopper pilot would get. You know, they spend a lot more time behind goggles. They spend a lot more time with, you know, precision insertion methods, which a conventional force pilot just wouldn't have access to because there's no requirement for it.
Right.
So it's different. Mandates will drive capability, and training will support that capability.
On a less serious note, the next question is, what country had the best MREs?
What country had the best MREs? Oh man, So I've had some of the Americans, some of the Aussies, some of the Brits. They all had some pretty good ones, and they all had some disastrous ones. It's the same with Canadian. There's some really good ones, and there's some really terrible ones. That's a funny question. If somebody's interested in MREs, listen, if we're consuming MREs for over a week, they all taste the same, to be completely honest. There's not much different. And at that point, you're 7, 10, 12 days into whatever the scenario is where you'd be on MREs. You know, you get to a certain point where it's just fuel. You eat it because it's there. You're not really consuming any of it because it tastes great, because over time, they all start to taste very similar.
And this person's follow-up question, which we have addressed. So they asked what the food is like at the Hill in general. Now, we've addressed food on deployment. Mm-hmm. And if you're curious about that, go listen to the podcast with Dave Dewar. But you've told me the food at the Hill, pretty solid, and you actually had a hand in that.
Yep. So the food at the Hill, what people are asking is, you know, is the mess kitchen, as it's referred to across the Canadian Armed Forces, is it good? Yeah, it's good. The food at Dwyer Hill is good, you know, because they're still part of the Canadian Armed Forces. The Canadian Armed Forces have like a parameter to meet. There's things that are part of the Canadian Armed Forces food process, and then at JTF2, they have the flexibility to kind of go above and beyond. So the food that is served on a daily basis at the unit, it's healthier. There's more optimal choices where it's not all mass produced. So yeah, the food is really good there. You know, while I was serving at the unit before departing, I had a small part to play in the consideration of not just what foods were being served, but the order. So when you come into a mess hall, generally you see, like, you know, cakes and sugar and just junk. And that would be the first thing you would see. Just a mindset shift on putting the more healthier choices up front, and then that less desirable stuff closer to the exit point as members roll through there and they pick their food choices. That was just a small point, but from a psychological perspective, when people come in and they're hungry, they'll, you know, grab whatever they see first because they're hungry. So if we get rid of, or not get rid of, excuse me, but kind of place that less desirable stuff more in the shadows and the shade closer to the exit point, generally there's less of that consumed. So yeah, food's good. Guys will be pleasantly surprised that in comparison to some of the other mess halls across the Canadian Armed Forces, it's a step above.
So another question is, did you guys get to choose what plate carriers you ran while you were at the unit? Now, we've talked weapon platforms and how it's pretty much standardized across the board, but you and I have had several conversations about plate carriers because one of us is a huge gear nerd. Yeah. So yeah, and because you were at an interesting time because it shifted right while you were there. Yeah. So yeah. Yeah, for plate carrier selection, for many years, you know, the general carrier would be what was, you know, procured for the organization.
So in the early days, I forget the rig that we had, but it was like old school with snaps and Velcro, and then plate carriers start to evolve and become a little bit more streamlined, which was great. For many years, we ran the Tier Tactical plate carrier. Used to be referred to as the DABA or a version of the Pico, and that was predominantly what most guys wore because that was in the procurement process or the system, and that's what was issued. And then for guys that were like kind of true gear nerds and gear guys, it would not be uncommon that guys might buy their own variation, and, as long as it, met a certain spec and was able to hone the ceramic ballistic plates that were being utilized, they would try different carriers. And then as the years went on, and in my transition when I left, the unit was in that transition from switching from the tier to the Cry Precision JPC, so the jumpable plate carrier. And I think to this day, there are some guys that, they still run the tier because they're comfortable with it, they're familiar with it, and it works for them, so they haven't switched. Other guys have switched because, again, it's kind of like that latest, greatest. What's the newest thing? Guys will switch because it's the newest thing, not necessarily because it's any significant game changer. But the reality is when you use one versus another, try it out a little bit, you might find one fits you a little bit better. You might find one a little bit less cumbersome, a little bit less material, whatever the realities are. That's very individual based. So to answer your question, there is certain platforms that are provided for the members, but there is some flexibility and luxury. If somebody wants to use something different, they certainly can.
Trying to find it on my phone to no avail. It's a company out of Almont that did the OG ones. It's like Alliance or something like that.
Is that what it was?
Or Allegiance, yeah. What is your favorite method of breaching?
Favorite method of breaching? So my time as a breacher, there was a heavy emphasis on a shorter version of Remington 870, referred to as a Ninja. So that was for ballistic breaching for a lot of common doors that we would see in structures. It was a tool of choice. Me personally, I found more success and I was more proficient with using a hooligan tool. For most push or pull doors, there wasn't many doors that I didn't find a way to get through with utilizing the tool. So I liked it personally. A little bit more time. I would take a little bit more time, and in progression, try to kick the door in first, or even take a step back, try to turn the doorknob. That might be the best course of action. If the door is unlocked, then you're in. Door is locked, maybe give it a boot. No joy. Maybe quickly switch to the shotgun, do a little bit of work there. If the door is open, then off you go. So in that progression, I found sometimes, depending on the layout and how frequently the doors had to be breached, I often used the hoolie because it was already quick. It was in my hands and it was ready and accessible. But yeah, breaching is a very complex position to be in the stack. There's a lot going on, reading the door, giving direction on where to stack. And if we have to go explosive, looking for, realistic safe areas for the stack. So there's a lot going on in the breacher's head. He's got a very challenging job, very rewarding job as well. But from my limited experience with being a breacher, it was shotgun and hooligan tool was the two primary that I would go to.
I find this question interesting. It's going to be a hypothetical for you. Would you want your son to be an operator?
Would I want my son to be an operator? If I had a son, I would be proud if that's what he wanted to do, for sure. I don't have a son. I have a daughter. If she wanted to be an assaulter, I would strongly say no. And not for any other fact that the fact she's a female, and people will get their backs up and listen, I'm all about equal opportunity. However, in some situations with the reality of men and women being mixed, there is an emotional disconnect where men generally will want to protect women. And I would not want my daughter in a position where she's not being utilized as an asset, but she's more likely to be overwatched and protected. Is not a position for her. And I would encourage her otherwise. But if I had a son, 100%, I would encourage him. I would train him. I would push him. And I would do everything I could to see his success as an assaulter.
I'm trying to find a good last. We need a good positive last question here. This one's not super positive, but it's a really good question. Okay.
I'll positively twist it.
Okay. Well, it might be tough. Do you feel the CAF and government have trepidation recognizing heroes? No VC since World War II. No can VC ever. I would need to fact check that, but for all intents and purposes, I will believe it. What are your thoughts on that?
Great question. I think the higher echelon of the Canadian Armed Forces and the government of Canada could do a better job of highlighting some of the, and I use the term hero loosely only because that's how it's recognized. The word hero is recognized with people who support and respect the Canadian Armed Forces, and they see everybody as a hero. So I use that word loosely, but what I mean is there are a lot of good Canadian Armed Forces members who have done a lot of really good work that haven't been recognized for their work. And it's a two-part question, or a two-part answer. One is partially those guys do the job because they have purpose, they believe in it, and they absolutely love it. They're not doing it for accolades or pats on the back. The other part to the answer is they deserve to be recognized. And I think there's honor and pride in acknowledgement for doing good work. No matter how small the job or how big the job might be, just being appreciated, it goes a long way. Members want to feel like they've been appreciated. For people to do legitimately execute like heroistic events and been part of saving lives or minimizing the amount of damage that an enemy force was able to project on a situation or an outcome and circumstance because of the behaviors and the actions and the decision-making of a few people who've done some really remarkable things. I believe those people should be recognized. I do believe it would add an element of honor and pride to the Canadian Armed Forces, but it would also, especially coming from the government, the federal government, it would also acknowledge that they are appreciated at the highest level. And then that would filter down, with amongst the society that we share today. There are thousands and thousands of Canadians that don't know anything about the Canadian Armed Forces. And part and parcel is they're not doing any of their own research, but partially too is because there isn't the acknowledgement. So I do feel there'd be benefit to the acknowledgement. In fact, I would encourage it. It's not too late. There are guys that have done great things years and years and years ago, and it's not too late. You can still acknowledge them now while they're on the right side of the earth.
Just for brevity's sake, the question does say no VC since World War II, no Canadian, no can VC ever. The last Canadian Victoria Cross was awarded in 1945. Actually, there were a few that were awarded in 1995 to Canadians. So
1995?
Sorry, 1945. Did I say 95?
95.
Yeah, 1945. So there have been.
Yeah.
Just not since World War II.
Right. A guy asked me a question last night. How would I break down and what's the difference between training for course and training for real life?
Like CAF course?
Just in course in general. So like in his example is he's motivated to try out for JTF2.
Okay.
And he said, sometimes when I'm in a training environment, he said, I know it's a course, so I have to, perform a certain way to get the pass so I can carry on. He said, but I feel like it's a little bit different than what we're actually going to see in the real world. So how do I shift my mind when I'm on course to be in the moment of what we might see for real? I was like, whoa, that's a good question.
That is a very good question.
Yeah.
Go for it. You mean you just teed it up, so yeah. Go for it.
So the question was from a gentleman who I'm currently working with aspirations to try out for JTF2. He had asked me what he may expect, on selection, and if he's so successful and gets course loaded on the assaulter course. And in the questions, as we're navigating what it is that he's trying to get a little bit wiser on, was if everything goes well and he's on course, how to transform the mind. So when you're on course and you're training during course, there's standards that need to be met. there's evaluation checks, there's performance checks that need to be met. And that happens every week. And that's a progression on the teachables that are being delivered. And his question was, how do you keep your head in the right mind frame where you're not training just to pass a course, but you're training for the realities of what you might face operationally? So I thought that was a great question. And the way that I would answer it is, on course, you're right. They're going to do everything they can when they're providing that training to make it as realistic as possible. But there's an element of the human factor that will not be presented. For an example, we get taught something on Monday, we're going to get tested on it on Thursday, for example, and then we need to meet a standard. So how do you keep your head wrapped around the fact that you may need this someday down the line in an operational context? I think the best way to approach that is, even though you're on course and there are certain things that need to be met as a standard perspective, remember that that's a mechanism to illustrate or to exemplify that you're understanding the material. The onus is on us to ensure that we connect with, we may have to use this technique or this procedure or this tactic operationally. So I want to know how to do it. I want to know how to fail at it. I want to know how to respond after a failure. Most importantly, I want to be better at it tomorrow than I was today. And that, I think, would be the healthiest way to keep your mind wrapped around the fact that it's not just course. This is preparation for what you may face, operationally down the road. And I think that might be a way to approach it from a mindset perspective is, you're on course. Yes, you have to pass a standard in order to progress on to the next phase. But each and every piece that is delivered is for a reason. And it's for a very specific reason. And there are a ton of people with decades of experience that are creating these mechanisms that are as readily accessible for the realities of what guys are facing operationally in the current context. So the material changes every year. The standards change slightly depending on what it is every year based on what the guys are facing for real. So as operations and as the operational environment changes, so too does the delivery mechanism for selection. So too does the delivery mechanism for the actual hands and feet skills. Hopefully that answers it.
That was great. All right. That ends the second edition of Extended Ask the Operator. That's good. Like, it's almost 40 minutes. Cool. All right. Thanks,
buddy.
boss. Appreciate it.
No problem. Amazing.